people can we have in gallery view and Metago these days? I actually don't. It's been a while since I actually participated in something in Metago, besides just watching.
So I think the grid view should go to 25, but we'll find out. I would like
Great.
everybody to share a video if you're comfortable doing so. Again, for this to be a team meeting. Do be aware as we're going through this meeting, since we are using Metaco, unless we make a special exception, the recording of this will end up as a posted to YouTube as materials for the tools team interim meeting that it's set up under.
Just trying audio again.
It worked that time. Couple of minutes for more people to join. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm seeing a few names on the roster I don't recognize. For those of you that have not been to one of these before, this is a coordination meeting between the people that are developing the tools and the folks that are deploying the tools and the larger users of the tools like the RPC and IANA and groups like that. The meeting is open. We don't mind having people around, but if you don't have your hands deeply in things, please try not to interrupt our flow as we're moving along. Do feel free to ask questions, but we do have a pretty tight agenda that we need to get through in this hour. So let's start. Again, by reminding people that this is recorded, and unlike our previous instances of this, it will end up pushed to YouTube and attached to materials for the interim meeting that this was set up under as an interim meeting of the tools team. So let's start off with the hot topics. Alice reports that we don't have any RSC blocking production issues to study. As we noted at the last meeting, we're planning to do a rebuild of IETF-A. Glenn has started this and indicates in the notes that because of time constraints on him, it's slipping into late February that we'll be likely to have this ready for transition. Hopefully we can start transition earlier than that. I'm sorry, start the testing earlier than that, Glenn. Glenn, are you here?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I'm sorry. Yes, I hope the testing can begin as soon as possible.
Okay. So folks should be aware of the important dates for IETF 113 as we're talking about making this fairly major transition. It looks like that we've got a narrow window between when the schedule is published and we get into the crunch of draft submissions. So we'll have to choose our cutover date fairly carefully in that window, or consider what it would mean to wait to move to the new instance until after 113. I would prefer not to wait if we can. There are some pretty important improvements coming in with the newer operating system and the newer hardware that would be good to get on. We talked last time briefly about trying to get the lists that are currently hosted at rfceditor.org ingested into Mail Archive. And Glenn, at the time, suggested that we could move rfceditor.org's mail processing to IETF-A so that the lists just go into Mail Archive and get archived at headers just like everything else. So I wanted to discuss here to get a sense for priority. Is this something that we should move on sooner rather than later? And the real sooner or later switch, I think, is do we try to do this before we move to Mailman 3 or after? So Maria, just go ahead and talk. I don't think we have so many people here that we need to manage a queue. Thank you, though.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt anything. Yeah, I'm basically just here to mention that this becomes more and more relevant when we have the new RFC editor model, because we have some more mailing lists then. And for those, it's especially important to archive them. But I think the timeline is still not super urgent. I don't know what your timeline is for Amendment 3, but for the new RFC editor model, it's, I don't know, a couple of months, maybe half a year until we actually need most of this probably.
Okay, so I would like to propose that when we do make this move, that we don't hold it behind Mailman 3, that we actually move the RFC editor lists into the current way we do Mailman. I don't think we'll have name collisions which would be the main thing that would suggest that we wait for Mailman 3. And then move them to Mailman 3 as we're moving everything else to Mailman 3 as a second step. Glenn, do you see any major problems with taking things in that order?
No problems from my end, no.
I have to apologize for the leaf blower in my background. I hope my microphone isn't picking it up as well as my ears are. Okay, so let's take that as a tentative plan, and unless somebody objects to us moving the RFC editor org lists into the same processing that the rest of the IETF lists are, we'll queue that up for action probably after we get the new server up. Our subversion track conversion is moving close to its end. We have several simple projects that are ready to move. Hopefully we will get them moved this week. The few working groups that had track instances that they were using to use for document development are those repositories will be ready this week. There are 3 of them. 2 of them, I believe, will let me move this week. The other one, there's still an outstanding question. Alexi, you're here. The mail exchange that we had with John Clinson, how do you feel about it? Do you want to wait until after that BIS document is pushed out, the next version of that BIS document is pushed out before we transition your group?
If we can wait till after January 21st, that would be great. This is our interim date.
Okay, that should be very easy for us to do. Thank you. So after we move these simple things, we are going to move XML to RFC, take a few days to actually push XML to RFC through a release cycle. Even if it doesn't have any big changes in it, we will exercise going all the way to release using GitHub. We'll take what we learned from that to feed back into the converting tools and then move the data tracker and mail archive after that. I have the timelines that we're currently expecting in here. As always, these things tend to be a little bit more complicated than we expect. So I feel it's likely we'll slip a little bit off of early February and into late February for the data tracker, but we're going to shoot for that. Anybody have any questions about the subversion track work? We are very close to essentially removing the allocation of tools.ietf.org and replacing it with a set of redirects that we maintain. Henrik is building that set of redirects as we have been replacing services. The tools transition plan points out the big things that we have left to do. The long pole is still the BebXML replacement service, which I believe I talk about later. It's close, but we still have a ways to go before it's done. But our plan is still to actually stop allocating tools.ietf.org, replace xml2rc.tools.ietf.org with author tools before we get to IETF 113. This means people in general are going to be using author tools instead of the xml.rfc.tools.ietf.org interface. Kasara is putting together the beginnings of a plan to work with Glenn to move author tools from its current deployed in development instance stage to something that we would consider more production. And I guess the things that I want to call out that are left on that tools transition plan that we may not finish before we actually deallocate the, stop delegating the domain is the replacement for daily dose and possibly the replacement for BAP, although I think we have an interim plan in place where we can stand up an instance of BAP with its current web interface on our servers without too much difficulty. Anybody have any questions about tools.ietf.org before I move along? At the last meeting, the Secretariat took an action to build up a procedure for the Zulip server for when groups plan to use it. I see a question from Glenn here that I hadn't read yet. Let me read it real quick. So, Glenn, to your question that's in the notes, we can wait for Jay to get back to look at whether or not we have a note well that is site-wide. But my expectations from the last meeting was that the Secretariat could start adding groups now, and I was hoping the tools team could be added as soon as possible. And we can work on a site-wide note well later. So I had a question. I'm glad that we have as many IAB and ISG folks as we have here today. Now that we've got this Slack instance set up, would those bodies consider using it in place of Slack, or are you firmly embedded in Slack at this point?
The plan was I think for both. Oh, sorry, Eric.
No, go on. I was trying to talk from the previous point and asking it, and then I come back on the Slack stuff. Does it mean that the Jabber room will be removed for the working group as well? Or if there still
Eventually,
be
the
bridge
plan
between
right
both?
now, if you follow the plan we have right now, the Java room will be bridged to one of the two rooms that is created for the working groups. And
Okay.
at least for the short term, Medico is still connected to Jabber. And we will be talking to Medico in the future about having them connect to Zulip directly.
Okay. That was my first question. Miriam, back to you. And sorry again.
No worries. I wanted to answer the question. So I think both the ISG and the IAB a year ago committed to use Slack for like the next coming year, and then decide with the next slate what to do then. So I think if we want to transition, it would be better to do that in March, which is before March, when we have the new group of people ready. I also see, at least for the ISG, that Slack is used quite heavily. So effectively, that works pretty well for the ISG. I wouldn't want to interrupt that. I personally have no experience with Zulip, so I think it would be very helpful for me and for other ISG members to have some kind of a test set up and get a little bit familiar with Zulip before we switch over or make a decision to switch over. But in any case, I think we need more discussion in both groups when we have the new people for the next term before we can make a decision.
So I think we should set up. Go ahead, Eric.
I fully second Miriam on this, and especially being in a complete virtual world, right? And I never met my ISG colleague for 2 years, and we managed to get some kind of community feeling through Slack. And it would be very hurting if we cannot move this community feeling to Zulip, right? So it's not only a tool issue, I guess, but a way that Slack is always open. Whatever. Basically, Slack for us is kind of important right now, but like Miriam said, let's wait until we exchange the dots and see what's there, right? So I've been using Slack for now 1 year. I'm happy to move to Zulip on my side if it provides the same kind of easy interaction. But if you're continuing to go virtual, it's really important to get this kind of easy to use tool. And maybe Zulip is the same kind of tool.
So I'm hearing we should set up the spaces for the IAB and the ISG and let them explore as a test instance. And if we need to, we can reset them if we need to make changes.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Roman sent the announcement out that started the clock for the shutdown of the FTP services. That's currently set to happen on April 18th. There's really not much background work that we need to do at this point. All the redirects are in place. Pages have all been changed to point to the right places. When we get to April, we just turn FTPD off and then deal with the crux of anyone that hasn't managed to migrate to other tools yet. I'll call out here again that Roman's volunteered to help people migrate. So if there are people that have concerns about getting off of the current dependencies on FTP, there are resources available to assist. Greg, do you want to talk to the web analytics point?
Sure, I can try if my mic is working. Yeah, okay. So as the item explains, when we implemented Matoma Analytics on www.IETF.org, there was a promise to take a look at them after a year of operation, and that time has passed. So I just wanted to raise the question in the tools team here about whether or not there were any unexpected issues. From my perspective, things have been working pretty much as we expected, and we've been able to make some observations that have helped us in terms of the content. But I guess that was the first question, and as the second question, or the second item there, basically points out there were a number of suggestions in the lead up to implementation on www, and there have been requests since then to implement a similar approach to analytics on other IETF web properties. and I just wanted to see if there were any. I think my expectation, sort of looking at Eric here, and after talking with Roman, is that that step would include sort of letting the community know about that. But I wanted to see if there were any issues on the tools side before taking that step, and then I'll pause and see if Eric. I sort of put Eric's name against this item as well, so he may have other things to say. That I have.
No, my only point, right? I mean, I was using Matomo before for my own personal stuff, good tools. And we would love to get this kind of analytics specifically, for instance, for Young Catalog, right? Where we are investing a lot of money there. And whether if it's used by one people, by Benoit Claes once a month, right? It's not worth it. And hopefully Benoit will not listen to this. But it's worth the money. So at some point of time, we'll to get this. Now, the only issue with the Young Catalog is not only about web pages, which it's easy to integrate Matomo with JavaScript or whatever, but also API. And you know the story, right? So we need to get some tooling around it. So you're not that trivial. And now the last part, not related to this, I'm just curious whether, and I should know, whether those analytics are public. And I think they should be maybe public for everyone from the IETF community, and whether we can see this, just to avoid the privacy issue, right? So that everyone can see what's there.
Sorry,
So there was a pretty strong.
Okay. Do I sound
if
okay,
I could,
or
Greg,
is my audio right?
am I not coming through?
No, you are. You are.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just 1 second. Or I'll tell you what. I'll reply in the chat, and because my audio seems janky at my end.
So Eric, there was a pretty strong statement about who would have access to what the analytics were. And it was basically operator level people in the agreement with the community, and that we would not be opening these things up to people at large, specifically because of the even though we've done our best to obfuscate any personally identifying information that would make it into the analytics. The edges are still a little sharp. So.
But we do have these aggregate reports, right? There's like a PDF we upload on the webpage from time to time.
Yeah, Greg was nodding his head. Is that out of?
Yeah, he just put the link in the chat.
Link, okay.
So I think that's sufficient, but to be honest, I find this PDF format not very usable. It would be nice to have a different format, but that's probably not very high priority.
And by the way, it was this kind of statistic that I was looking for, right? I don't need to get any more further details, so that's perfect.
Okay. So my feel from the pieces of this conversation that I've heard is that we should be working towards extending analytics to most of the web properties that we have, data tracker, maybe even author tools, that we at this point should look for reasons not to add analytics to things rather than try to argue for arguing analytics into each of the properties. I also think that we need to do a little bit more work to come up with a uniform way of capturing the kinds of things that Eric hinted at, which the analytics tool won't report on, which are API accesses and direct downloads and things of that nature, more weblog analysis work that should become uniform across sites. And that's a goal. I don't know that it's something that we'll see any immediate progress on, but it's something that we can perhaps be pushing on mid-year and into late year this year. So. Anything else on the web analytics? I guess, Greg, one quick question. The conversations you had with Roman, you specifically talked about, was there any specific analysis that we needed to go back in and do about, what had actually been collected that needed to be done? I'm not remembering any from the agreement, but he would be the person that would have had it on point. Let's go back to him and triple check that.
Yeah, this is John Levine. I'm looking at the reports. I see the vast majority of visits say that they were for 10 seconds or less, which tells me they were probably web spiders. Any chance we can detect those and take them out? I mean, they're pretty easy to tell because they have distinctive user agents. I mean, you don't have to fix it now. It's just something. It jumped out at me like 80 or 90% of the visits were like 10 seconds or less, which doesn't sound like human beings to me.
Yeah, very large portion of the traffic we serve is to the robots.
That's consistent with what I see on my server. And most of them are junk robots, which we might consider blocking too.
All right, unless we've got something else, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. I still need to create a list of future tools workshops. The next one is not scheduled yet. The last one, the recordings and notes are already available. We are still working on integrating the data tracker to Wiki.js to move the wikis that we aren't moving programmatically, that we will crowdsource move. And this includes things like the IESG wiki. So that's standing behind completing this integration with these, with the data tracker, and we're expecting that work to restart in the next few weeks. Kasara, can you quickly touch on author tools and the website?
On author tools, there's one release with a few bug fixes on the IDDIF comparison, making it easy to use and changing the order of the results. And you can have a look at them on the release notes. Upcoming work is the main priority is getting this to a production server, and then I would look into the ABNF parser. Any questions about other tools?
I hope the folks on the call at least have been shaking it pretty hard. If you haven't been, please start doing so. It's time to get real traffic to it.
Yes, so on the Vector website side, there weren't any updates since last call. Upcoming work would include a new Bootstrap theme and having a special donate button, and it's with a contractor right now, so I'll update on the progress. Robert,
all right.
Do you want to take on the data tracker?
On the data tracker, we had a small bug fix and minor feature release earlier. I guess it was late last week. When we did that release, we had another instance of an issue that we ran into December that I talk about in detail in the text, and I'll leave it mostly for you to read the text. But in short, we've for long had a period where anytime the data tracker gets restarted, it has to warm up before it starts serving requests at speed. During that time, its request serve rate is very low. And these we've had 2 instances now, one in December and one in January, where the attempt to restart the data tracker just failed. So I can't say that it was deadlocked, but the contention that was involved did not look like it was going to resolve in any reasonable amount of time. So we have avoided that issue with some careful restart work that Glenn has done, but we're now putting a lot more priority on avoiding it until we can get a little bit deeper into understanding it. There are a lot of things underway that are likely to make things different. We're working on putting the data tracker behind Cloudflare. I have an instance of the sandbox running behind Cloudflare already. I have the Secretariat testing it. I will send a message out to Tools Discuss to get more people testing it as soon as we know that the very high level things are working and that we wouldn't be wasting a lot of people's time trying to get more traffic. That particular instance that is running behind Cloudflare is also running through Nginx and gUnicorn instead of through Apache Mod WSGI. It's running on a separate listen socket. If this works out well, we'll take the production data tracker deployment into the same set of stacks. And this will give us a great deal of benefit in separating the listen queues between the instance of Apache that we have right now that's serving a very large number of properties and the data tracker, so we have a little bit more insight into the way that the TCP handling is happening as requests are coming in. And we are pushing on improving individual view performance. I've got a prototype in right now for caching the menu content by login that survived testing yesterday and last night and is in the queue for merge into the next deployment for the data tracker. The move to the new server is also going to involve a move to a newer version of MySQL. We know from the performance sprint work that we did last year that will have a fairly significant boost in the performance of many of the lagging queries that we're currently suffering from on the existing deployment, just because of better index manipulating tools that the newer version of MySQL has available to it. Next point on the data tracker is that we have an issue with the way the registration data is currently being captured that leads to saying that some people are non-com eligible that really aren't. In particular, if we have someone, and this is an edge case, but if we have someone that signs up for the hackathon and the meeting, but only attends the hackathon, we will count them as attending the meeting right now. So it's not that bad of a thing, but we do want this work to be correct. So Ryan and I are working on a change to the way we're using the model. It's going to affect the data rows, but not the schema. We'll have a unique index over person and meeting and ticket type, so that we won't run into overcounting because of people that have day passes and week passes. Again, another edge case, but we're going to work those out. And I'm already talking with Metaco to make sure that the right thing happens with them. In the long term, I am expecting to work with Metaco to have them touch an API that tells us what session was attended. And we'll just go ahead and capture the many-to-many from session to person in the data tracker and can build our blue sheets out there, instead of Metaco having to build a text version out and post it at the end of the meetings. This will also improve our ability to calculate non-com eligibility in the future. Somebody started to ask a question.
I wanted to know, I was curious, Robert, how you discovered this problem.
Kasara was looking to notice that he was non-com eligible, and he knew he had not attended enough meetings yet. So, yep, it was a happenstance. You know, someone tripped over it. So, we mentioned moving to GitHub earlier. That's going to have a bit of a disruption in the development work that we're doing on the data tracker as we are setting up our new processes for working inside GitHub. We have two other big pieces of work that are going to be coming in. It will probably be the major things that we'll be talking about in the next two meetings, and that is finally getting the time zone aware timestamp work finished and deployed, and then bringing in the work that Lars and Nick are working on the transition to Bootstrap 5. Anybody have any other data tracker questions? As always, if there's something that we're not talking about that you really think we should be talking about with something like the data tracker, this call is a really good time to bring them up. Kasara, anything to talk about on XML to RFC, or just have people read the text?
Dates on XML to RFC, but if there are any urgent issues that I should look at, let me know.
For Mail Archive, Ryan reports that there's nothing to report right now. Glenn noted that when we do the Mailman 3 shift, there will have to be work done on, I don't know if it's Mail Archive proper, but there is the mail processing chain will have to be heavily touched. Will have to be essentially rewritten to work with Mailman 3. There are notes about that if people are interested. And if you go to the notes for the mail processing workshop that we had last year, you can see quite a bit of discussion about the things that we will have to update in the regular mail handling chain in order to make the transition to Mailman 3. Ryan, you want to talk about the registration system?
Just real briefly, I want to point out that as of 113, there'll be a new requirement. When you go to register for the meeting, you will first need to log in using your data tracker credentials. So there are another number of reasons for doing that, some benefits it provides, but that's a change from past behavior.
So Greg, this might be something to work on communicating to people, especially for the people that forget to register and are doing the last minute panic. Oh my gosh, I need to register right this second. That the way that they're going to need to start if they don't have a data tracker account is to create one.
Yeah, and basically that was my point as well. We need to be sure that newcomers, right, that just want to go to attend the first IETF meetings, knows what to do.
Yeah. So the registration system will, from what Ryan's described to me, will handhold people towards the data tracker if they can't log in or if they don't have an account already.
And of course, once you are logged on one side, you are logged on the other one, right?
Yep.
I mean, very frictionless stuff. I think that's important for the newcomers.
Anybody else have any registration system comments, questions?
I think this is still under discussion in the Secretariat, but I guess there's also some kind of tooling support needed in case we convert the in-person meeting to an online meeting last minute, and we also need to convert the registration somehow. Was that considered, or is there no additional tooling or implementation work needed?
This is Alexa, sorry. I think that we started to talk about this, and because of the VAT that is being charged to in-person registrations, my personal view, and Ryan, this is something I was going to want to talk to you about tomorrow, is that we'll have to refund the registrations and have people register again because it's too complicated because of that. If it was not a European-based meeting, we could probably handle it differently, but does that
I see.
make
Okay.
sense?
It does make sense. Let's discuss tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That causes me to ask for people, while we've got 20 minutes left, to be thinking of any other 113 coordination conversations that they expect to have, and if there's something that we need to bring up on this call to help make sure that the right conversations happen at the right time. I heard somebody unmute briefly. Was there somebody have a comment they wanted to make? Okay. Eric, Yang catalog.
Nothing to add beside the notes. So we extended the contract with Pantheon for 1 more year. And together with the two fathers that I wrote, Benoit and Joe Clark, we are pushing for new features. You've seen, for instance, the SID, not the SID from segment routing, but the SID from the CBOR working groups. And it would be nice to get a back and forward transition or display from the Yang to the SID and so on, as well as expanding the API. Hence my interest for API analytics to see whether it's correct. Yeah, and core it's indeed, and not CBOR.
All right. So we are just waiting for the final report on the security review of the data tracker. I already have the primary results sent to me directly. They found a small and relatively easy to remediate number of issues. You know, one of, I guess, the worst was that we were exposing some personal API keys through the API, and we closed that down fairly quickly. And fortunately, we were not yet at a point where that was something that was actually harmful. There is a note here about the transition to Mailman 3. I think in the interests of time, I'm going to hit some high points in the notes from Glenn. I guess the first question that I want to ask here is, does anybody think that it's something that we should be putting further off? I think that the takeaway that we had from our mail processing workshop was that we should work on it as soon as it was reasonable to do so, and then any reasons to wait for new features or functionality that's not yet present to show up is not the right thing to do at this point. But if anybody thinks otherwise, please say so now. Otherwise, we're going to be working to schedule this thing in at the next reasonable time to do the amount of work that's needed to make the transition. So Glenn notes that such a transition would necessarily happen after we have the new server online. We will be doing development perhaps in parallel on the sandbox. I think we might even work on building a Docker instance that's specific to the mail chain that we can build real tests for, and we can have things happening in this instance as we're working with. Glenn points out that we might be able to do this a list at a time rather than taking every list over as one great big bulk piece of motion. That would be great if it works out. we'll have to look and make sure that what we have to do in the processing chain will let us do that. The only places that we would run into trouble is whether or not we can tell in the mail chain at the right places that we're processing things that will eventually be fed into Mailman 3 versus into Mailman 2. As we noted in the workshop, some of the larger pieces of work will require a complete rewrite of post-confirm and the work we're doing for DChem, and probably the ways we're handing things off to the mail archive. Post-confirm itself is still Python 2. It's one of the, I think it's going to be one of the last Python 2 things that we end up actually having in production. So it's not a matter of all the software is in place, and it's just a matter of working through configuration. We've got some development to do before this will complete. All right, we have 15 minutes left. If there's anything that we glossed over that people want to go back to, let's go ahead and take the time. If anybody's thought of 113 coordination topics or any other discussion that they'd like to bring up, please jump in now. I see Lars jump to the video.
Yeah, if nobody has anything else, I want to sort of quickly update or maybe even discuss the Bootstrap 5 stuff a little bit. So whenever I have a few minutes, I'm like checking yet another template and see if it works. So this is basically requires going for every single template in the data tracker. And man, there's a lot more than there used to be when we did the Bootstrap 3 stuff 10 years ago. So it's slow going, but at least sort of there was a whole bunch of test breakage because of some updated JavaScript stuff like the date picker and the auto completion stuff that rendered completely different HTML, and that broke all kinds of tests, specifically the Selenium stuff. And I fixed all that finally, but it took a while over the holidays. Thank God there was nothing else to do. But I'm hoping that I'm sort of get this done within a week or two, hopefully. The problem is that it's a massive change, right? So everything looks slightly different, and I'm sure there's breakage even though the tests are not breaking. So I'm kind of wondering, I mean, the current way we release the data tracker is we don't really have a development branch, right? So ideally for this kind of thing, I think we want to have a development branch where everybody else is then also working and testing their stuff on the Bootstrap 5 version and fixes things before we go to production with this. So it's slightly different than we usually do it.
Something that I kind of did breeze through earlier is before that Bootstrap 5 branch comes in, we're going to get the time zone aware branch in. And that's going to mean backporting the time zone aware branch back into the Bootstrap branch. And I very much agree that we do this in a development branch. This is Nick and Kasara and Jennifer and I have been talking about how we'll use GitHub and having, you know, a development branch and a release candidate kind of path forward is what we'll do. So I think we'll have an opportunity to get eyes on the new work, at least in the context of development instances, far more easily than we have in the past. So from the conversations that we had with you, we're anticipating having builds of that development branch, having the actual container built essentially per commit, and people can pull the tip of dev and have it immediately available. So you know, I believe that it's going to take Nick a few weeks behind you with the work that you're doing on the templates to go back in and actual build tests for the JavaScript that was not tested at all. and that JavaScript will probably, that testing work will probably uncover quite a lot of stuff that you've been discovering with the templates that you just can't discover right now because there aren't Selenium tests. Nick, are you here? Remind me the name of the test tool that you started to write tests in instead of Selenium. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it for the moment.
It's Cypress.
Yeah. So Lars, you might take a look at if you find yourself fixing other Selenium tests, take a look at what he's been doing with this other test tool and consider just moving to that thing instead.
It's working now. It was slightly painful because I didn't know Selenium before.
Yeah.
But I think I got it to the point. The only thing that occasionally breaks is one of the Ajax things that loads person autocompletes, and I don't know why. It works like in 99% of the cases, and in 1% it times up. And I don't think it does this on the other branch.
Interesting.
But then again, I didn't run the tests that often there, so it might just fail there as well. The other thing, so I'm basically using the basic Bootstrap 5 template, so I've not themed it at all, which means it looks basically completely different to the current data tracker look and feel in terms of fonts and colors and everything, right? It's looks like a vanilla Bootstrap 5 thing. The question is, we probably want to have a discussion at some point whether we want to sort of make it look like the old one or whether we want to make it look different, and if so, how?
So I suspect that there are some things that we would want to push it towards looking a little bit closer to the existing data tracker, but we've got this other project that is out for dealing with basic things like colors and fonts and the way that the links are presented and things like that we want to apply across all sites, and that's ultimately what we should be pushing this thing towards. The question that I've got is, with basic scaffolding, have you kept the scaffolding the same, like the lists when you have a list result, does that still look more or less like the list of things, or are there any big changes?
That hasn't changed, but some of the widgets are slightly different in Bootstrap 5, and some things are not there anymore, like wells that were used in a bunch of places, and there's other things there now, and so there's some changes like that. And specifically, I don't know who did the review tool. I hope I'm not stepping on any toes, but that is very creatively using a whole bunch of UI elements, and it's not so. This is what I'm doing right now, actually, working through those templates.
Yeah. Well, it could well be, we get enough developers, get some tools discussed, community members looking at things, we can get early feedback that would help us better inform how much effort we put into making the transition less jarring for people when we do make the deployment. All right. Anything else on the Bootstrap 5 stuff, Lars? Anyone have any other topics? Thanks everyone for taking the time to do this coordination. I think it really helps us as we're moving along, and we'll see you online over the next few weeks. Bye.